Welcome to another episode of The Practical Metaphysical Journey, the place where practical meets the paranormal, the mundane meets the metaphysical, and the spiritual meets the spooky. A place where we share the experiences of our journeys here on Earth. We encourage you to listen and see what resonates, because we're all different yet the same. We invite you to take a break with us, so unpack and stay a while. We're glad you stopped by for a visit. Well, welcome back, everybody. This is the next episode of our Practical Metaphysical Journey podcast that the three of us are putting together. As we've mentioned in the first one, we kind of did our introductions of the whole idea of the podcast is really to take some time to talk about various topics that we've encountered, learned about, have some experience with in the whole realm of things metaphysical. And there can be a variety of different things you'll see as we get through. We've talked about the last one, talked about ghosts and spirits and how we encounter that. With this particular podcast, we're going to be talking about the good and bad. The title we gave it is Good and Bad, Two Sides of the Same Coin. And I put this one together in that, for me, some of the biggest lessons and some of the most progress that I feel I've made in my journey in improving and becoming, better version of myself is to get that my understanding of what good and bad is. So I thought that would be a really good topic to kind of discuss. And as always, we'll see that as we go through this, the three of us have different opinions, different definitions, but it's the discussion that's the important part, and looking at things in different ways, different perceptions, and learning some of that. So I'm David, and I have my two friends here with me.
I'm Deb. And I'm Lisa.
And if you've been watching our other episodes, then hopefully you'll start learning our names, know who we are and what we're doing. So like I was saying in the opening part of this, the whole topic of what's good and bad, for me has been a fascinating topic, or fascinating, I'm trying to think of the word that I want, but just in getting my own understanding of what good and bad is, and once I've figured that out for myself, I think everybody has to come up with their own ideas of good and bad. But once I got my understanding of good and bad, I have found that, I'm generally a lot happier with things. Things don't bother me as much as they used to.
Yeah.
Because I have my definition of good and bad now and how I approach things. I remember probably about 8 years ago or so, the job that I had at that time, I didn't like. I was having an awful time, and my friends around me were noticing it and noticing that my demeanor was changing and that I was always upset and everything. And that's around the time I started the whole process of looking at good and bad and starting to get that definition. And I learned when I finally just decided to stop looking at the situation as bad, my whole attitude to life changed. In fact, I remember one of my friends talking to me one day, and she looked at me and says, "Did you change jobs?" I said, "No, I still have the same job." She says, "But you're happy."
Mm-hmm.
And it was because I stopped the way I was thinking about things.
I think it's a difference in perspective versus perception.
Yes.
And there is a difference between those two words. And I've noticed that too. Your perception for me comes from a much more personal feeling space. What space am I in right now? Well, I'm perceiving this as. Whereas with perspective, I step outside of myself. And it's like, okay, the perspective on this situation is this. My perception is something different. So it's kind of being able to step outside of that situation and to be able to define good, bad, and I think it is just taking a lot of emotion out of it. I think that's the huge part right there. But you're never without emotion. So it's more self-mastery and trying to figure out the reality of things versus the feelings of the moment. So it's tough. It's tough. It sounds like it should be such an easy topic. This is good, this is bad. This is a judgment, this is moral, this is ethical, this is whatever. This is the way I want it, this is the way I don't, but it's a really big topic.
Well, and what I perceive as good and bad could be totally different from your perception of good and bad.
Absolutely.
So I wrote down the word judgment too, and I wrote down perception and expectation.
Yes.
Was a lot of where I was going to come from with this is just, our
That's
lived
great.
experiences give us an expectation of when something's happening. We can either perceive it as good or bad, and then that changes how we are reacting with that situation. And so why aren't we all on the same page here, right?
Right.
So somebody's acting totally, benign about something, and they're like, you should have more emotion around this. But their definition of what's good and bad with it, sometimes you don't have to be involved. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
You don't have to be involved in it. But for me, a lot of times, good and bad is interchangeable with right and wrong.
Yes.
And as soon as I start doing that, playing that game, that brings in a whole bunch of emotion about, am I right about this? Or what's right about this that you're not getting? That kind of thing. Like, just all of that just kind of bring almost an overload of information and emotion with it.
And the relativity of it. I could be, okay, I should be upset about this, but it doesn't relate to me in any way. So I'm happy to jump on your bandwagon to support you, but it really doesn't.
Well, with your job, David, like what was, do you remember what turned that? Or did you just say, you know what, I'm looking at this in a certain way, I'm not going to do that anymore? What did you do?
You're asking me to remember something from 8 years ago.
Well, I just wondered, because if your friend noticed it so distinctly.
Yeah, I think, I guess, kind of taking your where you're saying perception, I think I decided to perceive it as neither good or bad. Mm-hmm. It just was.
Okay. Yeah. So you went to the neutrality of it.
Yes.
Was able to give you a different shift.
That's when I just, and another thing that you said, Deb, that I think is key for me on some of this too is when I decided to stop perceiving it as bad, I was stepping out of the situation. So it no longer had control over me. Mm-hmm. It was something at that time. I just said, okay, it's work. I've got to do this so I can pay the bills. But, at the same time, I'm choosing to stay here. I could go get another job if I wanted to. Mm-hmm. I could. Yeah. I took myself out of the situation.
You released it and got your freedom.
Right.
Yeah.
And then realized, I have friends. There's a lot of other things that I'm doing. It's only work.
Do you think it's a control, there was a control thing there where you were trying to control and contain whatever was happening? It doesn't have to be specifics, but as soon as you stepped out of control and said, you know what, I don't have to control the way this is going, you kind of just let yourself kind of, like the self-responsibility of containing it, you're like, you know what, like you said, I only work here, I could go somewhere else. As soon as that was like, oh yeah, you know what, I'm not responsible. I'm actually not responsible for what's actually happening.
In that scenario, for me, it was more about, I stopped taking it personally.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah, good.
So I don't think it was I was trying to necessarily...
Good bad.
Yeah. I don't think it was I had issues with controlling the situation in any way. It was just, again, stepping out of it, going, it's not me. It's, the stuff that's frustrating me is not directed at me. It's just what is.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
I think that's interesting too, because when I first saw this topic, and I'm like, ooh, okay, I got to define good and define bad. I think is good is stuff that makes me feel good, stuff that validates me, stuff that makes me feel safe, secure, happy, brings out all the positive emotions that I enjoy that are comforting to me. Bad is stuff that is the opposite of that doesn't make me feel good, but then that does make it such a personal thing. I could look at other things that are going on in life and say, okay, is this good, is this bad, and it's broader than that. So it's just kind of a strange thing. It's a topic that covers so many individual places. And then, like just recently, with the health issue that I had where I was admitted to the hospital, that's a bad thing. That was a bad, scary thing. But was it really? It kind of turns out it was good, because for some of the information that I found out from various scans and testing and all that stuff, things are actually a lot better going on in my body, in my system, than my imagination was telling me. So it's actually a good thing that happened, because it can preclude something else. And it also gave me information that I didn't have, that I've been worried, stressing myself out in a bad way. So it's taking that situation and not being a part of it, but letting it just be what it was. So I get it. It can go either way. And it's also interesting that we can take that information and shift things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So,
well, I will be open about some training that I've had in a modality called Access Consciousness. Mm-hmm. So when, like you said, I saw the topic, I was like, ooh, this takes me right into what I've learned through Access Consciousness. So some of the terminology I may use is for that. So I just want to give them some credit. Basically, I'm just giving
absolutely.
Access Consciousness credit for that. But a lot of things that we're talking about, it's like our point of view of it.
Yeah.
What our point of view. And our point of view does create our reality, right? Like what
absolutely.
we're seeing. So we have control over that. And you changed your point of view and it changed your situation.
Yeah.
And a lot of judgment, you said judgment in the beginning, that was one of the words I wrote down too, is the judgments that we form around things and the structure that we think things should be.
Yeah.
Like good and bad and all of that kind of thing. All of that is what's creating our life. And if we are the only ones that can change that, we think that the other person or the situation needs to change, but it actually starts with us.
Yeah.
And we have control over that, which is awesome because we have an opportunity to shift.
Yeah, and it's interesting too, because I think our idea of what's good and bad, it's been molded from the time we were little on, and with lots of changes and different spins that we put on things. And so it's interesting, wherever that information has come from, what we've been told. How many times do I tell my dog, good dog, bad dog? She goes and gets something and she's chewing on it. That feels good to her. She thinks she's a good dog. It's my shoe, my watch, my makeup brush, my whatever. And I'm yelling at her, bad dog. And, it's like a basic understanding. She doesn't think it's bad. I do. And, it's an interesting thing. And I'm just because I'm saying bad dog, good dog a lot. Trying to teach. Well, I'm sure I got that a lot from my parents too, not necessarily in those phrases, but it's the reinforcement you get for behavior too, and then how you shape your frame of reference from that point on, and hopefully evolve with that through our different circumstances throughout life.
Yeah. And something, as you listen to these podcasts, and I know Deb and Lisa are seeing this, I'm putting these topics together in a certain order.
Uh-oh. That's bad.
Is
that good or bad?
I have a plan.
Oh, dear.
If you think about it, like some of the things that you were just saying, Lisa, where you have, the capability. My cat's going to start making noise, of course.
Good cat, or is it bad?
Way to go, Missy. Yeah, good
there
cat.
we go.
Well, if she's destroying the furniture, that's
Bad
not
girl.
good.
Okay.
She thinks it's good.
Were you saying you have the capability to change the way you view a situation. Think about what we discussed in the Do Ghosts Only Come Out at Night, and setting boundaries, and that you have the capability and the right to set boundaries.
Always.
That's the same thing here. Is as far as defining what something's good or bad or whatever, you have that capability to change your viewpoint and to change your perception of how things are going.
And share with others what your boundary is about good or bad.
Yes.
Again, she's thinking, thank you for this huge, beautiful scratching post. And you're like, that is my chair. Like sometimes you have to let people know what your parameter is, because they've had their lived experiences where, perhaps whatever's happening to them is not necessarily a bad thing, or they don't have any tie to it, but for you it's a huge trigger. So sometimes you just have to express those things to people and let them know where you're coming from, that clear communication on where you're coming from with it.
You know what else it reminded me of at the beginning? So I kind of went into a brief mental lockdown on it when I first started reading Neil Donald Walsh's Conversations with God book. And the conversations went on, and part of what the author was writing, questioning having these conversations with God, was that, murder is bad. And God's like, it really isn't. It's neither. And I'm like, wait a minute, hold it. It really brought into play, God in the book. It was like, no, everything that's out there is godlike and good, and it's really not good or bad. It just is. And it's like, but wait, we need to punish them for this and that. Well, do you? Because then you're just as bad. It was this whole thing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, we can't be. I'm reading this book that God says murder's good, and I'm grossly over paraphrasing this. But I was like, well, wait a minute, then if nothing is really wrong in God's eyes, then what the heck? Why aren't we all just living like the Purge? And even the response to that was like, meh, do what you want to. I'm here to learn through all of you, through your experiences. And it was very dissatisfying. But it made me think. And it was like, okay, it really is a perspective. How do you condone the murder of a person over the murder of a person who murdered a person? And that's everyone's personal idea of good and bad. I mean, I know how I feel about it. I'd whack him in a heartbeat. But you never know. But that's the thing. It's like, oh my gosh, it's just how do you get your brain to come to what is good and what is bad?
Or be neutral about it.
And be neutral.
What if you don't have those definitions? What if you don't have the definitions?
How would you explain it to an alien? Don't scratch my furniture. That's bad.
I think a lot of it comes from the energetics of it. So when you're coming into a situation with your judgments, the other person can feel that, and you get a lot of reactions just from that energetic, like bumping up against each other. And then you get the verbal bumping up against each other, and sometimes physical bumping up against each other. It goes across all the planes. So can you define the best way for you? I'm always like, how can we empower people? I mean, are you a better communicator? Are you, can you do something more on the spiritual level? Like, what can you do with this knowledge you're going to gain from just discerning good and bad in the situation? And I'm just using a scenario where you might want to diffuse a situation, right? What does that look like? What tips can we give someone to start navigating once they realize, like, oh, I am perceiving this as good, therefore blah, blah, blah. Or no, I'm perceiving this as bad, and only the bad needs an action step maybe. But really, you know what? Maybe we could just
step out
from...
Yeah. I would say one of the things for me that has helped me get to the point where I am, where I can step out. Sometimes not perfect at it. There's still times things will happen, and I just immediately go to the place of I'm angry at somebody or something. You use the term, Deb, self-mastery. I think that, or self-aware. You need to do some... let me rephrase that. I had to do work within myself and look at what causes me to get upset, or what causes me to feel happy or something. Becoming more aware of my belief systems has given me the capability to then start stepping out of situations. I'm better at, like I said, I'm not perfect. I still have triggers. There's still things that'll happen, and I get upset at people. But I think I find that faster, or I realize it faster, so I can stop it and I can step out of it and be a little bit better. Like an example of another time being able to just kind of step out of the situation. I was at the grocery store buying some cans of cat food, and one of the cans I didn't realize was badly dented. And so the guy that was bagging the groceries said, "Do you want me to go get you another one?" I said, "Yes, thank you very much." And he goes off, and he was taking a while, so she finished checking everything out, let me kind of go to the side so she could help other customers, and I'm sitting there, and I found myself getting upset and going, "Why is this taking so long? This is ridiculous. It's just a can of cat food. Go and find that one particular flavor and bring it up here." And that's when I caught myself going, "Wait a second, I didn't have to be anywhere. Why am I getting upset? This man's trying to be helpful.
He's doing good in his eyes for you."
Right, and I'm getting upset at something that just...
He's being really bad at being good.
Yeah.
In your eyes.
Yeah, there's no reason for that. And then he eventually came back up and said, "I'm sorry, I couldn't find another one of these." And I was like, "Okay, I'll go." And I found it was there. But then I also just started thinking, well, yeah, he was trying to be helpful. I don't know that man's situation. When I buy those cans of cat food, I go by the color of the label.
Right.
Maybe he's colorblind.
Oh,
I don't know.
There you go.
So where I was getting upset because he was trying to find that flavor and couldn't find it. In the grand scheme of things, if you step back and look at the bigger picture, it doesn't matter in that scenario.
No, and it was actually, it's funny because it was kind of a neat connection with that other person who might have been feeling good about going to get you this can. "Oh, I feel good. I'm going to go help this guy out. I'm going to be good and go get this." Then he couldn't find it, so it might have made him feel bad. But then y'all came together on it. So it's interesting, and it ties right into the emotional intelligence wave that people have been going through and becoming more aware of their emotions instead of just sitting there blindly scratching at things the way we do. Good kitty. But then
that used to be a really nice chair, but
yeah.
anyways.
Oh, she's playing. Oh, that's hysterical.
Great. Now
Good
she's
for
gonna
her.
play with the toys.
That's okay. She's entertaining herself. She's using us as background. And then the other thing too is it's funny because we use the word triggers, but if we shift our perspective and look at that word as opportunity. Now, am I going to do that all the time? No, I'm going to say this trigger. I'm not going to sit there every time and say, "Well, this is a great opportunity twitch, for me to learn some self-mastery, twitch, when I'm just trying to get out of there or get the extra fire sauce on my chalupa and it's slow coming or there's 4 cars ahead of me." It's like, oh my goodness. So, yeah, it's funny. And I think that the times I get the most annoyed are times when I'm in a hurry, feel like I should be in a hurry. It's time relative. And my thing is I'm always like, well, don't waste my time. Well, I waste people's time all the time. I'm sure they probably think the same thing about me frequently enough. But it's like, what's so special about my time that something I've put into place is slowing me down or whatever. It's really funny to sit back and think about that.
Is that your bag?
She's like, that's all this stuff.
She's about to check out your bag.
Yeah, for those that are listening, I adopted a cat a couple of weeks ago, and
which is good.
Yeah.
She's out exploring. She's not used to other people being here.
She sees my bag, which my cats normally climb into and sleep in.
Yeah,
my backpack.
Well, and she's also like, that's not supposed
That's
to
not
be
supposed
there.
to be there. I've rearranged
That's my
things.
spot.
Yeah.
So she's thinking your bag's bad.
Exactly.
You took
my
her
cats
spot
think
on
it's
the couch.
good because they sleep in it. Yep.
Yeah, and I would go back to also in these scenarios like you're talking about, the triggers and everything, stepping outside of it and also realizing that in many circumstances, these scenarios that are causing you to find an opportunity or to be triggered, it's not personal.
Right.
Somebody's not out to get you in those scenarios. Typically, yes, there's times you're going to encounter people they're doing something directed at you, but like that, man trying to find that other can of cat food for me and couldn't find it. It wasn't like he said, well, I'm not going to on purpose find that can of food because of him specifically. No.
Right. You never know what other people are going through. Like you kind of alluded to that too, Deb, when you were saying, but you never know. You don't really know unless you can have communication. Most of the times you find out I was totally out in left field with that because of my experiences, my judgment, the way things have happened in the past, whatever that is.
And I think that falls into ego in a big way too, and how self-important we make ourselves in our stories, which is, legit to a point, of course, because we're the ones living our lives. But it's funny because it's like, why is this conspiring against me? Or why is so-and-so doing this or wasting time? Dr. Phil says it all the time. And he said, if you knew how little somebody else was actually thinking about you, that you're thinking they're thinking about you, you'd be amazed. And it's true. The whole world isn't out to inconvenience me. The guys ahead of me driving slowly in traffic, maybe they had an accident, so they're nervous drivers now. Who knows? Maybe I'm driving too closely to them, but I think I'm good. But I'm out there because they aren't out of my dang way.
Doesn't the world revolve around each one of us?
Absolutely.
We evidently doesn't.
The own center of our own universes, which then if we think about that, what's our gravitational pull? What are we pulling in? Good, bad, ugly, in between?
Yeah, and I think another kind of part to this, and going back to the idea of being self-aware, so understanding yourself, for me, understanding also by understanding myself better, I know better what my boundaries are. Mm-hmm. And that's where I'm striving to get to. Again,
I would say lack of boundaries, maybe lack of boundaries.
Yeah.
But for me, it's knowing what my boundaries are, better understanding myself and what I won't allow other people to do.
Mm-hmm. Or where you need to set a boundary.
Right. So that allows me, I think, a lot of times to do that, get out of the situation, to realize, like in that case, I keep going back to the cat food thing, but in that scenario, he didn't cross a boundary for me. So step out of the situation, just let it be what it is.
We always say, like in some of these situations where we're being delayed or something like this, and the big stories that always come to mind are when a tragedy happens, 9/11. Oh, this guy's alarm didn't go off, and so he didn't get to Twin Towers until late, and by then, as we all know, the world collapsed there for us. And so it's like, okay, what am I really losing from this moment? What did I have to gain if he got there that much more quickly? We don't know, and it is hard to step out of that.
Tell the story about today, when you said you were on the way, and what happened?
So I had to stop at Taco Bell, because I needed my chalupa and my taco loco. Okay? I really had to have that. And the people ahead of me were being slow, and I'm cursing at them. I'm not going to lie. I'm saying things I won't say now, but I'm cursing at them. Each one of them was an idiot, and I was saying it out loud in my car to make sure the universe knew. Then I'm like, I really need an iced coffee. I'm not going to make it without an iced coffee. So I'm like, fine, I'll swing through Starbucks. This will be easy peasy. So no, of course it wasn't. And the girl taking my order, she's standing there. I'm holding my phone out so she can scan my stupid little thing. And I'm like, hello, scan my price thing, scan it. And she's ignoring me. And then she comes over and she goes, there were two guys named Evan. And I figured that if there's two Evans in here, I had to stand between them and make a wish. And I'm thinking, because now I'm late getting to Lisa's. We were supposed to meet at 1:00. I am not going to be late. But then it was my choice to make these stops. Well, as I get on the highway, just before me, there was a car accident. And it was so recently just before me that there were parts of the car that had been knocked off still spinning in the road. Could that have been me? Maybe the universe stepped in and said, you don't know it all, dummy. And look, you thought this was going to be bad because you're late. It's good because you're going to get there. So that's as recent as today. So I still called people idiots when they were driving, though. I did, because I still wanted to get where I was getting, but
But that takes us back to judgment. You know, we
Yes.
go into judgment. That's like almost an autopilot kind of thing as a human for some reason, is we go to judgment on something. But I feel like a lot of that is because we feel we're judged,
Yeah.
you know, so it's kind of a reciprocal thing sometimes.
And I know that I think too, we want to feel good. We want to feel good. We want to feel like good things are happening to us. It just feels better to feel good. And whatever those needs are that are being met that help build that up in us, we don't want to feel bad. So I think that sometimes, you know, I'm like, I will say for me, I'll try to twist the situation. I only want good things to happen. How do you know what's good if you don't have some bad as well? Where's your comparison? Where's your line? I could win $1 million. I could travel. I could do whatever, all these things that would be good. But, you know, as a little tiny kid, when my mother would be complaining about the rain, I'll never forget this, driving in the car, and she's complaining about yet another day of rain in upstate central New York, where it rains all the time. And just from the back seat, I was tiny. And I remember saying, yeah, but if we didn't have rain, we wouldn't appreciate the sun. Well, that didn't fly. She was driving in the rain. But, you know, it was just I was little. I was tiny.
Yeah,
and I came up with that, and I just didn't understand why she was being so upset. Well, I'm sitting in the back seat. I'm not having to drive in the rain and all that. Ask me now. But so it's funny how all of that, you know, is in my striving to feel good all the time and do things that feel good or be good or whatever, be acknowledged for being good and doing the right thing versus the wrong thing.
And the reason that we judge scenarios to be good and bad is so subjective.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we could all three of us see something transpire, and we could
Absolutely.
have totally different perspectives on it.
Yeah, the thing is, even things simple like food.
Yeah.
There could be things that you two absolutely love to have, I can't stand.
Mm-hmm.
It's very subjective. I have to say, when I was putting this topic together and writing out the schedule or the list of things, the outline. Thank you. Couldn't remember the word. I started going down the rabbit hole as I was looking things up, because what I generally will do is I'll look up the definitions of the things that we're talking about, just to kind of set a base and then work from there. So looking up things like good and looking up the definition of bad. But then in those definitions, they talk about things being moral or ethical. Well, that's subjective. Now we'll go look up, how do you define moral? How do you define ethical? It's just so subjective, and I try very hard now not to be so set in stone of thinking of something as good and bad, to then close out the opportunity to potentially learn something.
Right.
Because I think if you go in thinking you know what's good and you know what's bad, I think you're missing opportunities.
There you go.
To learn about yourself and learn about scenarios.
To me, that's like closing it down, limitation versus being open and creating possibilities. So if you're only doing this, you're not going to learn a whole lot, right? But if you're open to the possibilities, open to staying in a question around something, the opportunity to learn something goes way farther. And the fact that that's your mechanism, that you're turning, when you realize you're doing this, you're like, hold on a second, I'm making it finite. How can I go infinite with it and turn it around for, like you said, a learning experience?
It's less self-limiting to flip that coin, good on one side, bad on the other. What if it lands on the edge?
Or what I think is good is actually something that's going to create an opportunity for someone else. We're all playing a role in it, right? We're all playing a role in it. I'm not saying we purposefully go out and do bad things, right? Like that's the morality part you're talking about. But it just in any experience we're having, if we don't have a definition around it, but it's more like hold on a second, I understand something's happening right now. I'm feeling like something, I may need to learn something in this situation. What is possible?
Yeah.
What is possible here with this situation? And it might not always end up like you feel good about it later. It might not be that. You don't know till you experience it. But that I work with, because it's different when it's a one-on-one thing.
Yeah.
But when you're in a group of people, it's like, oh my gosh, there's so many scenarios. Like, who's the one that needs to learn the lesson? Well, most of the time it's coming back to me, right?
Yeah.
But it makes navigation a little more difficult. But if you can always realize, if you are only going this way with it, judgments are closing, right? If you're being judgmental, it can only go to finite. But if you can turn it around to be infinite, asking like, what's possible here? What can I learn from this? Is it my place to learn something? What can I help for someone else? Like, maybe there's something I need to say or do for someone else.
And I like that you brought up the idea of like how it kind of changes when it's one-on-one versus being in a group. Because right before that, I was thinking about, for me, some of that learning to be more self-aware is realizing I'm just a part of a much larger whole.
Mm-hmm.
And like we said before, it doesn't the world revolve around me? No, it doesn't. There's a whole, universe, whatever you want to call it, and we're a part of that. So for me to sit and define something as good and bad is limited to just what I know. But I don't know the bigger picture.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting too, because if you are thinking of something as good or bad, what are you going to do with that information? So if I'm thinking a certain situation is bad, that I'm witnessing somebody else doing something, what am I going to do about it? Now I'm stuck with my judgment and my feeling about that judgment that is resulted from somebody else doing something. What am I going to do? Am I going to, then what? Then what? So it's kind of being on that edge and stepping back, like you said, in that neutral place and doing it with grace.
I was thinking the word grace earlier. I wish I would have said it now, or at least wrote it down so I couldn't say that, but I was thinking.
Well, because it's interesting, and the word grace then, what does that mean? To me, it means giving permission to step back and let things be the way they need to be, not having that judgmental space.
Right.
So if I'm giving myself some grace, I'm giving myself that kind, loving space to not have to be in that position of power that I think I have to be in to label something good or bad. But it's tough. I think it's tough. I all day long grapple with good and bad, like I think everybody else does
we all
too.
do. Yeah, absolutely. And I would add a little bit to what you were thinking, what grace is to me, as you were talking about that. I think part of that process of giving yourself grace or whatever is putting your ego to the side.
Yes, absolutely. Mm-hmm. And forgiveness.
Because you're no longer looking at it like, what's in it for me? You're just accepting what's there and what's going on.
And also reflecting that back to the other person. So you can have grace for other people.
Yes.
And you need to put their ego over here as well when you're looking at the whole scenario. You're like, oh.
Right.
I mean, it's pretty easy to identify other people's ego when it's coming at you or you're observing it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
But, yes, again, to ourselves first. But also when we're interacting with people is, again, we have to have grace for, like, we don't know all of their lived experiences. We don't understand why they're creating the dialogue in their head about the situation. And a lot of times they can't communicate that verbally. It's not going to come out that way. It comes out, again, maybe physically or some other way. Yeah. That just compounds everything, right? That's what I
think everybody gets stuck in their own mind loop too, unless you're a little more evolved and trained, or taking that opportunity to have that introspection, like you're saying, I realize I can step into this space. And it is a pretty peaceful space too. I mean, if you're stepping out of that dilemma that's out there and you're just stepping back saying it is what it is, which is a statement that I used to hate when people would use for me. I'd be all incensed about it. It's like, yeah, it is what it is. I'm like, it's like, why aren't you as incensed as me? Because I'm always right. And even if I was right all the time, who cares? You know? And so this is a very interesting space.
Another story of something that happened to me that is I think goes along with this topic. And that was part 1 of the episode Good and Bad, Two Sides of the Same Coin. Stay tuned in a couple of weeks for part 2.